Good evening, and welcome again to Dapsy Chairs. I have a nice game I want to show us today, and this game was actually played in the 16th, I think the 16th round. It was like a kind of a knockout event at the just completed Azerbaijan Chess Championship. Well, it was actually completed 2 days ago. So this was a game that was played between Grandmaster Shak Mamedyarov and Grandmaster Abbasov. It's interesting to see the Benko being employed at this level. And the reason I'm saying that is there are some openings you rarely see at the top level. And sometimes you just wonder how the Super GMs play against it. So it was nice to see a Benko being played against Grandmaster Shak Mamedyarov, who was actually the top seed of this tournament. And he was able to play against the Benko. It's very, very, very instructional. So that's one of the reasons I actually want us to go and check this game out and see exactly, how to, play against this opponent. Yeah, anytime you come across it, and how to see, to see how the Super Gems handle this opening. All right, let's get right into it. So, white started off the move d4, 5. Knight f6 is played. We have more to c4, c5. Now, this c5 is pretty much inviting white to play the d5 move, and then we have b5, which is the Benko Gambit. Now, what's the idea of the Benko Gambit? For every opening you play, it's very important for you to have an idea of exactly what you're getting into. So, what is the idea of the Benko Gambit? So, the idea of the Benko Gambit is white black sacrifices a pawn by playing b5. It sacrifices a platform. So the idea is if white takes the pawn, white took the pawn in this game. If white takes the pawn, it pretty much gets a lot of counterplay on the b file and on the a file. So this is the thing. With the pawn sacrifice, black is looking to garner a lot of play on the b files and the a file. So a6 is played, sometimes even if you play that, I think I think I think white has, there's e6 possible, there's g6 possible. These are possible situations that can happen when you play against this opening. So g6 is possible. So like I said, the idea is to actually to use these two files. Now, have this in mind because later on in this game, things didn't go the way black expected. And it's no surprise because of the way black actually handled the opening. So let's get right back into the game. So d5 is played, b5. Now that's the move that shows the Benko Gambit. Of course, white just plays knight to f3. So g6 is played, captures the pawn on b5. a6 is played, captures the pawn on a6. Bishop to g7. So black is pretty much trying to get his pieces in the game. Bishop to g7 is going to come. It's going to castle, and then it's going to capture the pawn at some point in time, bring the knight to c5, to b4. At some point, try to push this pawn ahead to get a square where the knight can come here. Because later on in this game, this pawn on e4 is going to find itself on, this pawn on e2 is going to find itself on e4, thereby giving this light square an opportunity for the knight to jump in. But let's see how this game continues. So g3 is played. So in this position, white says, you know what, I'm going to go for the fianchetto here. I'm going to put my bishop on the g2 square. I'm going to let my bishop have a very strong influence on this diagonal. And of course, I don't want to play e3 because normally after the e3, the exchange of bishop on this diagonal doesn't really favor white as much based on the theory. So g3 is played here, castles, bishop to g2. Now, note that black is in no hurry to capture the a6 pawn. So black first of all castles, keep the king safe, then he moves his pawn to d6, just trying to build a nice position. Like I said, his play is going to be pretty much based on these two files. He's going to try to hit this pawn, coupled, the pieces on the b file and the a file, coupled with the diagonal from the bishop on g7. So it's going to put a lot of pressure on white's position. Now, if white can handle that pressure, I think black is just losing. So d6 is played, white castles, knight b d7. Like I said, black is just going about his business, totally ignoring the fact that, hey, there's a pawn here to be captured. But like I said, this is how the line normally gets played. So knight goes to c3, white develops his knight to c3. Of course, e4 is also coming at some point in time. Bishop takes a6. Queen goes to c2. Now, what's the idea of the queen c2? Now, by moving the queen to c2, white has some pressure on this little diagonal, I'm going to say. And of course, getting the queen off the back rank is always a good idea if you're looking to finish developing your pieces. And of course, bringing the queen to c2 also put some protection on the knight on c3 and also the pawn on b2. Why is this important? Like I said, there's going to be a lot of pressure on the b and the a file. Queen coming to b6, rook f coming to b8, and there's just going to be a lot of pressure on this white's position. If white can withstand the pressure, white is just winning. So knight b6 is played, rook to d1. Now, not rook to e1, rook to d1. Of course, it's very important to defend the pawn, and at the same time threatening to throw this pawn to e4, trying to make sure the pawn on d5 is protected by a pawn and not a piece. Why is it so important? You don't want to have to defend a pawn with a piece when you have a chance of defending the pawn with a pawn, so that the piece actually can have something else it's doing at some point in time. So rook to e8 is played. Now, that's a move that wasn't really in the database. Was it a preparation? I have no clue. And now, one thing we also have to remember is Abbasov, that was on the black side of this line, is not such an active player. I mean, he's actually more of a coach, or but still a grandmaster than a player. So, rook to e8 is played. After the move rook to e8, white plays e4. White looks pretty good. He's up a pawn. He has a very nice little pawn chain in the center. His pieces are looking very good. The bishop, the knight, queen is looking good. The rook on d1 is looking good. Knight on c3 is looking good. Even the bishop on c1 that is yet to get into game is looking good because he has possibilities. So after the move e4, bishop goes to b7. I think this is the first big mistake by black. Bishop to b7. Think about it. What exactly is the idea of the bishop to b7? He might be looking to make the move e6. Now, there's a problem here. There's a problem here. Now, if you're thinking about moving the bishop to b7 and playing e6, now you're pretty much moving away from why you gave up the pawn in the first place. Think about that. And I mentioned this earlier. The idea of the Benko is for the black pieces to create a lot of play on the b file and on the a file, and also couple with the bishop on g7, putting pressure on this long diagonal. Now, if you have to move the bishop to b7 and trying to play e6, trying to open up the position in the center, I think you're pretty much playing against what your main plan is, which is to play on the queen side. And of course, after the bishop to b7, I don't think e6 would be such a good move, because you have to be worried about moves like takes back, bishop to f4 is very good, putting immediate pressure on the pawn on d6. And with bishop to f4, rook c1, and it's going to be very hard for black to really give us a reason why he gave up the pawns in the first place. So bishop to b7 is played. After the move bishop to b7, we have a4. White says, what, let me try to gain some space. Let me try to push my pawn forward twice. And this is one thing also. White's approach pretty much is, I'm going to see what black is going to do before I actually start to create some play on my own. A4, of course, makes a lot of sense. A4 makes a lot of sense. You're trying to gain some space, A5 can come at some point in time. And also the b5 square can be used as an anchor for this knight if there's a need for that. So a4 is played. We have queen to d7. We have h3. What's the point of h3? It's always very important for you to stop this knight g4, knight g4, knight e5 maneuver. Because that way, when the knight g4, knight e5 comes, the knight here is exchanged off, this bishop on g7 comes to life on this diagonal. So h3 is played. And I like the way white is handling it. And this is one of the reasons I wanted us to see this game. Some people that plays a d4, how does the super grandmasters handle such gambits? So h3 is played. We have rook f to b. I spoke about this earlier on. Black's plan is to play on the b and the a files. And that's exactly where he's putting all his pieces to. Now, there's a problem here that I see with the black pieces. And the problem being this bishop on b7. I really don't know what the importance of this bishop is. Now, I mentioned this earlier. The bishop on coming to g2 is I think based on theory is actually better than coming to the diagonal, because when this bishop gets exchanged with the bishop here, I think that kind of helps black out. Because think about it, you don't have this bishop on b7, you don't have this bishop on g2. I think black has a little, it's kind of good for black because then it actually can put a lot of pressure on these light squares. And of course, the rook on b8 can actually have a very strong influence on the b5 right away. So rook a2 is played. Of course, another reason why the move rook a2 is played is to get away from this long diagonal. I'm sure you might want to play b3 at some point in time. And what's the point of b3? Trying to keep an eye on the light squares. So rook a2 was played. It plays knight to e8. What's the point of knight to e8? I think it's a dual purpose move. Number one is clearly long diagonal for the bishop. And number two, try to get the knight to another square where it can actually bring some possibilities for the black pieces. So b3 is played. We have knight to c7. We have bishop to d2. White finishes the development with a move bishop to d2. Now all white pieces are developed, but he still has to wait to see what black is trying to do, because white can't really just start throwing his pawns or trying to create any kind of attack. And there's a saying, always attack where you have your strongest. Right now, it's actually hard to say if it is white is better on the king side or the center or the queen side. I would say he's actually looking within the center squares. So queen c2 is played. Sorry, not queen c2. Bishop d2 is played. We have bishop to e6. Now the bishop comes back. Like, okay, bishop is coming back to this diagonal. What exactly is the bishop doing? I really don't know. But of course, like I said, black is going to have to find a way to create some play. So bishop to a6 is played. We have king to h2, rook to a7. What's the point of rook a7? There's a possibility of doubling the rooks on the b5 and putting pressure on the pawn on b3. Rook goes back to a1, rook b7, rook comes to b1, protecting the pawn on b3 twice, winning the rook. There's a potential attack on the pawn on b3 twice, the two rooks on the b5. So let's keep going. Knight goes to c8. What's the point? There's really not an immediate threat right now. So nothing for white to be worried about. So after knight to c8, we have h4. Now white is trying to create some play, trying to get something done. Bishop h3 is a possibility. Maybe if I can get rid of one of the knights, playing e5 is also a possibility. Bishop f4, e5 is a possibility. Because if I can open up the center, and black still doesn't have any play on the queen side, I don't think this is not good. I don't think it's going to go well for the black pieces. So e6. I mentioned this move earlier. E6. E6. If black has to play e6 in this position, and now the question is, what exactly is the point of the pawn sacrifice on the queen side in the first place? Yes, I know there are some situations where you play e6 in the Benko, but the thing is, you have absolutely nothing on the queen side. Now, playing the move e6, you're pretty much trying to open up the position. Now, if you open up the position, and most of the pieces are on the queen side, and you're trying to open up the center squares, I think you're going to be a little disadvantaged on that part of the board. So e6 is a very questionable move, even though it looks like a move that creates some play. You're trying to hit the pawns, the white pawns, the d5, the e4. But the question is, what exactly is the plan in the first place? Why did you get into this position in the first place? Now you have to remember you're pawn down. And for the pawn down, you have all this activity you were trying to generate on the queen side. If you don't have that activity, I don't think you have anything. So a6 is played, captures on e6, captures back, bishop to e3, threatening bishop c5 immediately. All of a sudden, this position is looking worse for black. Like I said, we have the double rooks on the b5 that is really not doing anything because b3 is defended as many times as it's attacked. So now, if white can create some play in the center, it's going to be very hard for the black pieces to switch to the center and try to start to defend the position. So after the move bishop e3, we have queen to e7, getting away from the potential bishop take because of the pin on the d file. So queen goes to e7. We have knight to g5. And what's the point of knight to g5? I'm not really sure what knight to g5. Probably to create some, to try to create some weaknesses, maybe, or maybe to push the pawn 2 steps, try to get some more grip on the central square, and then the knight comes back to f3. Possible things. Bishop h3 wouldn't really make any sense because you really can't take this yet because of the knight c7. So let's keep going. So queen goes to Queen goes to f6, threatening to win a piece on c3 because we have the battery here. But that was actually not a good move by black. That was actually a bad move by black. So after the move queen to f6, the knight goes to a2. White gives back the bad move right away. White says, you know what, I'm just going to have to make my own bad move. That was not the best move. According to the engine in this position, e5 was a very strong move. e5, I mean, think about this. Think about this. We talk about this all the time. Whenever there's an extra attack, we have one right here. So without a pawn on e4, I can actually just snap this rook off the board. But there's a pawn on e4, right? So I can't do that. But check this out. Queen f6 comes into the picture. What's the point of queen f6? You have a threat on c3. What if I just push the pawn to attack your queen? Whatever happens, I'm going to take the rook. Now you're not just down the pawn, but you're going to be down an exchange. And then, it's not really going to look good for the black pieces. And of course, after the e5, I can always bring this knight back to e4, putting pressure on d6, protecting the knight on c3. This just looks very strong for the white pieces. But it's kind of strange that the top seed, GM Shak, missed that e5 move. e5 is like, I'm sure even an expert, a 2000, could have just seen that. So knight 8 was played. H6. Another thing why I really don't like the A2 is, unless you really have no moves at all, it's always not a good idea to move your pieces backwards. It's always not a good idea unless that's the only move. So knight A2 goes, we have H6, knight goes to F3, we have E5. Now we don't have the possibility of the E5, but there's something going on here. The center is now closed, sort of. So if black can get a knight to d4, that can be very annoying. Knight to d4 can be very annoying because the knight is being supported by very two strong pawns, And like I said, this is why I said, it would be nice to see how super grandmasters handle such positions. So let's keep going and see how this game continued. So b4 is played. Now, the idea of b4 is, now white is trying to solve his problem tactically. You can't win the piece here because you take, I take. If you take, I can take. If you take, I'm going to take your knight here. And I'm looking good. So b4 is played, takes on b4, knight takes on b4, rook captures back, rook captures, queen takes c7. So let's take stock again. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns for white. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns for black. Let's look at the activity of the pieces. White's bishop on h3 on g2 is not looking so bad, although he's protecting the bishop. He can always find a way to put more pressure on this knight. Possibility. Okay, bishop on e3 looking good, knight on f3 looking good, rook on d1 is looking good, bishop on a6 for black is looking good, the rook on b4 is looking good. I don't see it. I would say it's looking good because it's more of a target than anything active. Of course, bishop g7 is looking really bad. You cannot come to h6 to get into the game. You can't go to f8 to come into the game. So this is a negative for black. So after the exchange of the pieces, white is still a pawn up. He's not just a pawn up. He's a very strong pass pawn up. So, like I said, black must work some magic now, otherwise it's just going to be pretty much busted. So, queen f7 is played. We have queen to a5 attacking the rook, putting pressure on the bishop. Queen goes to b7, protecting the bishop and the rook on b4. We have bishop to h3. The idea is to take the queen. Well, this queen is really getting overworked because she's not just protecting the bishop and the rook. She's also protecting the knight on c8. So if I can get rid of this knight on c8, if the queen captures, then I can get the rook on b4. So that threat has to be taken care of. Bishop goes to e2, double attack. So bishop goes to g2, and queen to d8 check. Actually, in this position, I was looking at the move I was looking at this move rook to c1, the idea of rook takes. But in every game of chess you always want to think about the checks first, the captures, and then the threats. If the checks don't really make a lot of sense, look for the capture. If the capture don't really make a lot of sense, look for a threat. So here, black, white goes for the check. Queen to d8 check. King goes h7. Bishop takes the knight on c8. Now, white is a piece up. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. White is a piece up. He's also a pawn up for better position. And everything is just looking bad for black. Remember, black sacrificed the pawn earlier in the opening, in the name of playing the Benko. But looking at this position now, I think we can pretty much say the black hasn't handled this position well. So bishop takes c8, attacking the queen, sorry. Queen goes to f7, putting pressure on the bishop. Of course, the rook is still under attack on the d1 square. So we have h5. That's a very strong move. The threat is just pawn takes. If king takes bishop check is very strong. If queen takes bishop here still is very strong. And if you don't take, I'm still going to take anyway, and then still bring bishop to f5. So looking very green for the black pieces. h5 is played. Rook takes the pawn. Rook takes d6. Still threatening pawn take, which is a very strong move. It takes the pawn. It goes bishop to f7. Now, if the queen moves away, bishop to g8 can be very disastrous. Or I think bishop to g8 check. King goes back, bishop comes to f7, then queen goes to g8. That'll be a checkmate. And after the move, bishop takes e6. Black resign. Black say, you know what, I've had enough of this. Interesting game. One thing I'm going to tell us is anytime you play any kind of opening, always try to stick to the principles guiding the opening. That's one way you would know that you're still doing what you're supposed to do. The moment you move away from the principles, now you're pretty much on your own. And then if you're on your own, then the question is, why are you even playing that opening in the first place if you're not really so sure exactly what you expect? All right. I want you all to check the game out. And now, this tournament was won by Grandmaster Mamedov Ralph, which is a very, it was, I think it was supposed to be the third seed. I think Rajabov lost to him, and Shak, that won the game, he had lost to him. They lost him in very strange ways. They made like a one move blunder, and I'm going to try and find out about those games and try and share those games with us, so that we see how this game works. So at the end of the day, Mamedov was one. He came out ahead and became the new national champion for the Azerbaijani team. And of course, I have to get their flags, which is right behind me, to let you all know that Azerbaijan is represented here. All right. Check out the games and let me know what you all feel. Thanks for always being here. See you soon. Take care and God bless. Bye for now.